Good night, viewers, and welcome to Alternate Views. Always happy to be here. Welcome. This evening, we're going to give the viewers a chance to come on. I know we've been doing a lot of work as of recent. This evening, we'll be having a live guest he's a Barbadian, but he's over and abroad, traveling the world, learning new cultures, gaining new skills, expanding his horizons, and that is what Alternative Views is all about. Recognizing Barbadians who contribute. They don't have to be domiciled here. So, welcome this evening to all of the viewers, Alternative Views. We are always happy to have you. Don't forget to like the page. Don't forget to share the page as well. And let's have a really good discussion this evening. So I will give some persons the chance to come on. We're at 26 persons so far. So we want to take the time to allow other viewers to join the show and let us have a very good discussion. This evening, as I said, we'll be discussing Caribbean economics, and we have a very wide regional fan base at Alternate Views. We also have a very wide international fan base at Alternate Views. And we want to have some plans and we want to have some discussions surrounding the new trends that are emerging in Caribbean economies. We'd also link that to the contribution of the international world to Caribbean economics and what the future holds for particularly Barbados, as we are most Barbadians in entirety, but however, we are so connected and interconnected as a region. It is worthwhile to have that broad discussion about what is happening over on the other islands. So, good night to you once more. Um, yes, the dog is barking in the background. I don't know what is happening with him. Um, I can't control that per se. I don't have the hand of God happening right now to say, well. So we just try to work with the scenario at hand. Um, Temporary inconvenience, but nevertheless, thank you, Sean Cole, for tuning in this evening. Gal Base, you were here before 7, so thank you very much. She's saying good evening to Imara and your guest, Mr. Griffith. So thank you, Gal Base, for coming on. We have Elaine Rivers. Thank you, Elaine, for tuning in this evening. I hope to have a very excellent discussion. Don't forget to bring your questions, Mr. Griffith. Definitely enjoy your interaction. And so don't forget your questions. And he'll be very pleased to have that interaction on the live stream this evening. So we're here February the 8th, 2024, 7:07 p.m. Alternate Views. And we're having Rasheed Griffith, Economist, to have some extensive discussions with us. We're at 37 persons so far. Don't forget to like again. Don't forget to share the stream as well to your colleagues, your comrades, as the discussion this evening will focus on Caribbean economies. And I want your feedback. For the last couple of shows, especially last week, we had a really good discussion uh, with Jamal Slocum. So for those who missed that show, that was an excellent show on film and television. We touched a bit on the work of Marcel Weeks. We touched a bit on the work of Jamal Slocum. We touched on the work of Presiri. And we discussed the culture at work. And Jamal shared some very incisive information with us, Barbados, about film and in his role uh, as the film president of the film and television president. That association, I learned a lot about it, and I would encourage you, if you have not seen it, to take it in at some point in time. Before Jamal, we had Mr. Watson Juke, who is a member of the Tobago House of Assembly. It's called an assemblyman. Right? So Mr. Juke, assemblyman for the Tobago House of Assembly. You know, Mr. Juke was the leader of the Progressive Democratic Patriots in Tobago, PDP, and he led his party to victory in the Tobago House of Assembly, removing the People's National Movement, or the PNM, which controlled Trinidad, Tobago, sorry, for quite some time. So we're seeing new emerging trends, even in the political sphere. So throughout the Caribbean economies, we're seeing some new behaviors creeping in. We're seeing some new, philosophies emerging. You can always let me know if I am clear in terms of the audio and the visual as well. So as I was saying, we're seeing some new emerging trends happening in the region. And as Mr. Watson Duke said, he is interested in Tobago not receiving independence per se, but self-determination. And self-determination, allows Tobago to set its economic plans, its policy plans, to be free of the shackles of Trinidad as it relates to the policy futures of Tobago. And that leads to a very interesting discussion. At this point, our Caribbean economies are basically at the end of an era, and the future. Persons like Mr. Griffith, when he comes on, he would discuss what the future of Caribbean economies can look like with new ideas, with new policies, and on alternate views, because we're going to have some changes to the program, some very good changes, new innovative changes, as we be partnering uh, with an organization. But I will not steal the thunder. I will let Mr. Griffith come on and we will share with you. So far we have 50 persons online. So don't forget to like and share the live. Let us get those numbers up. Let us add to the discussion tonight. I see Mr. Griffith here already. So we're going to welcome him in to Alternate Views and let him say good evening to you, the viewers. So he's here, Mr. Griffith. Welcome to Alternate Views, sir. You are the executive director of the Caribbean Progress Studies Institute, and we want to welcome you as your first time on Alternate Views. And I really hope, sir, that we have a very riveting discussion surrounding Caribbean economics and what is the future as it relates to policy and what are the trends, and give us some insight from your perspective, sir, as to what can happen. So you can start with an introduction of yourself and give some credence to the audience, and we follow from there. So over to you. You are muted, Mr. Griffith.
Hi, Kimar. Can you hear me now? Perfect. Well, good night. Good night, Kimar. And good night, all the viewers and listeners. So I'm Rasheed, originally from Barbados, born and raised, but I now live in Spain, in Madrid, in Spain. And I'm hoping to have a fun discussion tonight about some policy perspectives, giving a bit of a global view about some things that Barbados could be doing. And I might have some, let's say, controversial takes on some of the policy proposals, but we can definitely get into that and have a good conversation. And just to give a slight background about myself, so currently I'm the director of the Caribbean Progress Studies Institute. It's a very new organization that is aiming to promote more radical ideas to grow the Caribbean. Obviously, I have a particular interest in Barbados to have a better economic perspective for people who actually live in these countries. And also before that, I worked in the financial sector in Asia, in North America, and I also do some work with some think tanks and various public policy institutions in Washington, D.C. So that's a very brief background about myself, but happy to get into a conversation with Kimar and hopefully some very good questions from everyone here.
Yes, well, great introduction. As you heard, viewers, he has an extensive background in this area. So we're expecting you to come with your questions. As Mr. Griffith said, he's seeking to promote more radical ideas, not the traditional ideas. We're accustomed
Mhm,
to persons who make announcements on policies in the Caribbean. Those come from politicians. And as you know, most politicians, but some are qualified in the areas, um, some definitely not. So when we hear these grand policy announcements, especially economic policy announcements, coming
mhm,
from political figures who may not necessarily have the correct rhetoric to use, who may not have the extensive understanding of the issues, and when pressed for answers, they give more political answers on economic issues and more populist answers as opposed to the correct answer, which could give a
mhm.
true perspective as to where we stay as a Caribbean. So I'll first ask you, Mr. Griffith, in listening to the rhetoric of, we say, Caribbean personnel who announce economic policy, what are your thoughts as a professional surrounding the pronouncements of the political figures mainly? Because we don't really hear from the economists in the region as the leading voices on policy. Economists usually take a back seat, give consultation. Barbados, as of recent, developed a very large consultant economy. Um, and we don't really see the economists leading the discussion. So, what are your thoughts on that?
It's a tragedy, Kibar. That's to put it mildly. A lot of the essentially almost all of the conversation we hear from politicians in Barbados and Trinidad and Jamaica, as you said, are about pronouncements and not solutions to problems. So very oftentimes you would hear about we have this plan to construct some do some tax reductions, or we have some plans to increase the educational value of the country, but it did never go about doing things. Or for example, more recently you hear things particularly in Barbados, we will increase the alternative energy capacity by X year, but they don't really give good targets. They don't have a good way to actually monitor if there's having progress. You just hear the plans and you have some very big picture vision without the more important part, which is concrete management and concrete objectives and concrete back planning, concrete for example, just check to make sure things are going according to plan. We don't have that. And then, as I mentioned, it's a tragedy that Caribbean economists are essentially have gone mute when it comes to public policy in the Caribbean, which they live in, and they don't make any objections, critiques. Oftentimes, this is a matter of, I think some of them are probably very fearful of retribution from the governments. And there are many examples of this. You know, things were very bad back in the 70s, for example, when there were economists in Jamaica, Caribbean at UE Mona at the time, that would speak out against government policy in Jamaica, and then the government of Jamaica would ban them from entering Jamaica. So things were actually quite bad. But I think from those kind of episodes, the Caribbean economists became quite mute when it comes to policies, and it's a big issue because it obviously only hurts the average person who it's not their job to know heads or tails from what's going on. And people that do know heads or tails just to go back to their office and teach a class at 5 p.m. at KFL. And that's not enough. So I don't know if that will change anytime soon, but it definitely has to change for sure.
Speaking of change, Rashi, alternative views represents
Mm-hmm.
change,
Mm-hmm.
right? And our alternative views have been leading some public discussions, um, notwithstanding alternate views has some type of political connotation to it.
Hmm.
However, we tend to keep more practical in terms of economic views. So let's look at how platforms, not necessarily alternate views, but let's look at how platforms could be developed, maybe through the Caribbean Progress Studies Institute, to give that flexibility that you speak of in terms of the more knowledgeable and notable persons in society are contributing to public policy and the discussion without backlash or ridicule.
Hmm. Yeah, that's the hope, that's the plan of the CPSI. And anyone listening, you can actually see our blog at cpsi.media. It's www.cpsi.media. And you can see some of the stuff we wrote there. Now, in terms of the views, it's very often the case that the type of conversations you have in the Caribbean, they haven't actually evolved in the last, long before I was born. They haven't evolved since then. And for someone to mention, the CPSI started last year, so it's a very, very new organization. And the conversation has evolved since then. You see other countries or other regions, Latin America, Central America, Southeast Asia, they have been taking some ideas that even some very, renowned Caribbean economists created, and they ran with it. And in the Caribbean, we ourselves, we kind of like shun it and don't go anywhere. So some of the proposals from CPSI is very Caribbean wide, is trying to push these ideas that on the surface, on first reaction, we can see why people might have a slight aversion to it. But then the idea is to kind of discuss a bit more to make it a bit more palatable for people to kind of see why these radical policies might be actually very beneficial using real world examples, not just this fancy theory and so on that you hear a lot. Like actual countries did these actual things and they had these actual results. And that's the intent.
So could you give us an example of which you speak?
Yeah, so one example is the idea of dollarization. And in our instance, dollarization is the idea of replacing the Caribbean currencies fully with US dollars as the only currency you use in Barbados, in Trinidad, and Jamaica, so on. That's one large idea.
Dollarization. Could you? But you said, from what you heard, to replace the Caribbean currencies. So replace the Barbados dollar,
Mhm.
replace the Guyanese dollar, replace
Mhm.
the TT dollar, replace the Jamaican dollar, and to replace the EC currency. Um, that sounds very radical, as you
Sounds that way. Yeah, it sounds that
introduced it.
way. Yeah,
So
yeah, it sounds that way.
could you provide upon hearing it, I'm sure the audience may have a question, like, so if we change our currencies, what will that do? We're changing it over to the US dollar. How can that help? Um, what would the new Caribbean, what would the new Barbados, what would the new Jamaica look like without a dollar? We've all grown accustomed. We call ourselves New Agers, but we've all grown accustomed to having a Barbadian dollar pegged to the US dollar. So could you give us a future without that possibility?
Yeah, and please, if anyone has any questions on this, bring the questions. I'm here to answer them. So the idea is this. Right now, I'm going to just use Barbados as the core example here, but it applies equally to any other Caribbean country. So you have a Barbados currency, and that is pegged. And by pegged in Barbados, we use that term. We don't really usually know what it actually means. It means that at any point in time, the Central Bank of Barbados is ready and willing and able to buy Barbados currency back from the market, the people, institutions, and so on, at the fixed rate of $1 is $2 Barbados. If you go to the actual bank, you will see, for example, one USD is like 1.98 BBD and not a full two. That's because there's essentially a deal that the central bank and the commercial banks have where they keep the extra 2 cents as profit for doing the exchange. That's why in the official market, it's not fully 1 to 2. It's technically 1.98. That's why essentially how they made some money from the exchange rate.
Mhm.
Now, in reality, what that looks like is, everyone should probably know, if you're in Barbados, there are very hard capital controls on Barbadian citizens and companies. So if you're trying to get money out of Barbados as an individual, you have a hard limit on how much money you can take out, because Barbados currency is only valuable, as it only has value in 166 square miles of planet Earth. It's a very tiny, tiny slither of the planet that Barbados currency has any value. So because of that, by the time you physically exit Barbados, or if you're trying to consume anything not completely produced in Barbados, you need to use US currency. As I mentioned, because of the pegged exchange rate, and peg means that they don't have, for example, let's say Barbados, the country has $2 million of of Barbados currency that exists. In theory, you would think the central bank has $1 million to just have there in case someone wants to buy it. That's not what peg exchange rate is. A peg exchange rate that they have is a fraction of the total amount of Barbados currency. So if it was freely open, that means that in theory, it could be a demand pressure on the central bank that so many people want to sell Barbados currency for USD, the central bank does not have enough USD, and therefore you cannot keep the exchange rate at 2 to 1. To prevent that from happening, they have to limit the ability of people to go to get USD. Hence why you have very strong capital controls in Barbados.
Right.
So the limitation you have as Barbadian citizens with only banking in Barbados, and you have the capital controls, is because of the Barbados currency. That's why you have it.
Yes.
Now,
Okay. Wait,
if
hold on,
you
hold on. No, I don't want to lose the
sure,
viewers. Right. I just wanted to ask you to clarify maybe one or two things that you said in your explanation. You spoke about exchange controls, and for the viewers, exchange controls would be the restrictions on Barbados's foreign exchange, right? How we trade foreign exchange, how available that foreign exchange is. If you guys remember, Barbados, I think it was in the budget, 2018, 2019 budget, if I recall, Barbados announced a policy to liberalize what they call exchange controls that allows Barbadians to hold foreign currency accounts in US dollars.
it's
Right?
very slight liberalization, very, very
Yes.
slight.
Right. So we have a precursor into dollar trade. Um, we accept US dollars in Barbados on the black market, not really as a means of official trade in and amongst each other. Um, but as you said, the government of Barbados and maybe the private sector merely uses majority of the foreign exchange available to do transactions, right?
Well, Kimari, you have to be careful, right?
Yes.
Because the private sector exists for customers like you, right? You wear headphones, you talk to me on a computer, you're wearing a shirt, you're in a house with these things were not made in Barbados, right?
Correct.
All of these things you consume in your life in Barbados, like 99%, come from outside of Barbados, right? And therefore, to purchase those things, all the companies need to buy or pay in it US dollars. They can't use Barbados currency, they have to use USD. So every time you go to a supermarket in Carlton's to buy food, like Kellogg's, any kind of thing like that, Carlton then has to buy that Kellogg's to bring to Barbados because you want it, and they have to use USD. So it's not just a corporate private sector. To be clear, it's people in Barbados consume USD indirectly or even directly. If you want to buy something on Amazon, you go your CIBC card, type in Amazon, and so on. But on the back end, in the back part, CIBC has to use USD to fulfill that transaction on Amazon,
Yes.
right? So everything you consume in Barbados, I say everything, it's like 99.9%. So I'll continue to say everything
Yeah.
you consume in Barbados needs USD. So again, also the reason why you have the capital controls is to maintain the ability, because again, the central bank wants to have that peg at 2 to 1, but they don't have infinite USD, in the central bank account. So they have to essentially like speed limit a traffic light, to speed limit people consuming USD, so they have it for when the normal kind of commercial operations need to happen. So because of that traffic light called the exchange controls, the government has all these restrictions on people consuming things, and they're like, "Oh, I just want USD because I want USD." That's not enough for a good reason, because they need the extra USD when they're going to consume things, buying oil and so on and so on. So essentially, everything in Barbados runs on USD, right? Everything runs on USD. The only thing that doesn't run on USD is literally your salary you get every day.
Hmm.
And that to me is not good, because you actually have less ability, less freedom to choose what you do with your own money, because the government is saying, well, okay, hold up, you can only get it if we say you get it. And we can get into those kind of conversations. And then, as you know, if you travel, you do things like that. If you go outside of Barbados, that limit you have on your credit card, your deposit account, and so on, is artificial, because the government needs to speed limit a traffic light. Say, hey, you don't have absolute freedom to consume things. We got to make sure, because we want to have a BBD, Barbados currency, we want to make sure we can keep the traffic light going, so we have the ability to print more USD going forward. That's actually a bad thing. But
Yes.
but the core point, this one segment, is everything is already ran on USD. It is not some new thing.
Yeah. Well, viewers, I want to hear something from you. We have some interesting. We have an interesting comment, but we have some persons saying no. We're at 94, 96 persons now. So thank you for tuning on this evening. We are here with Mr. Rasheed Griffith, and Mr. Griffith is the executive director of the Caribbean Progress Studies Institute. And so far, he's been giving us some excellent and innovative thoughts surrounding the future of Caribbean economies. He touched on the dollarization of such economies, and dollarization is basically the changing out of US currencies, of the local currencies, sorry, for the US dollar. And he's giving some analysis as to why he believes that it is a suggestible idea to solve some of the gridlocks in our economies. So, good night to
Mm-hmm.
Square Four. Good night to you. Square Four is saying good night to you, Mr. Griffith.
Good night.
Welcome
Good
to
night.
Alternate Views. We have Emerson Bob who's saying good night to you as well. We
Good
have
night.
Rachel Thornhill, Oswald Newton. Good night to you, Oswald. We had a very good day on the road today. It was good to work with you. We have Marlene Seeley. Thank you for tuning in. We have Tony Paris, Joy and Faith. Good night to you guys. Good night to you again, Gal Biz. Dear Pastor. I like that name. Um, welcome to Alternate Views. Um, Lumumba Batson. Welcome, sir. Happy to have you. Keep doing the good work on the Burning Spear. Your work is not going unnoticed. And yes. So again, once more, welcome to Alternate Views. Don't forget to like um, Alternate Views. Don't forget to share, as this is a very interesting discussion so far. So, Mr. Griffith, we have at least two comments. Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we have Square Four saying no manufacturing in Barbados, all importation. Um,
True.
Sean Cool is saying that is why some assets you can't buy because of this system, because of the drain on the US dollar.
That is a very see, Sean. That's a very, very, very important point. So one of the things that Barbadians don't have access to, even though they should, for example, is like investing in foreign markets like the US and things like that. And one of the important reasons is because the government does not allow you to transfer USD for those kind of things, because they're trying to stop you from doing that because they need to restrict you from using more and more USD. Now, again, that's a very bad argument, but that's the argument they use. And also, so for example, you see people complain in Barbados, I think justifiably complain in Barbados that, well, what can I invest in? The stock market is nonsense in Barbados, unfortunately. You can't really put your money anywhere. But in theory, you could put it in the US, put it in Canada, and so on. But you have this really strong restriction of doing foreign investment from Barbados outwards because of this capital control issue in Barbados. Another issue is that it goes the opposite direction too. So one of the issues that foreign investors, like big companies like hedge funds and people who buy like investment into small countries, they have an issue where they don't want the extra risk in many cases of putting money into, let's say, Barbados and so on, because of the risk of the government not repaying back the loans that they get from them because they don't have enough foreign currency to pay back the debt, the loans. And that actually happened in Barbados several times in the last 5 years. So if you had the USD in Barbados, both sides, more Barbadians could invest outward into international assets, and Barbados will be able to attract more foreign investors in their bond markets and so on. And I speaking to such, I know, for example, a colleague of mine who is a hedge fund manager in the US that invests substantial money in Barbados' bonds and so on, and they would probably buy more if USD was the main currency. So one of the things that the government of Barbados complains about, and I say complain, but they're not really lying, it's true, that the rate of interest to which Barbados government is charged when they try to go and borrow money is very high. It's very high because the investors are wary of the risk of the government not being able to pay back the loans because of the whole currency issue. That's one big aspect of it. So if you
Well,
get rid of that problem, you actually free up some more investment into the country.
so Mr. Griffith, Barbados had extensive credit downgrades between 2013 to 2018. After 2018, Barbados, being the third country in world economic history to enter into debt restructuring and to restructure its treasury bills. This occurred in Russia, Ukraine, and Uruguay. We also defaulted on our
That occurred in many, many other countries also.
in terms of restructuring specifically government-owned treasury bills.
Oh yeah,
Well, my
it's
research,
happening right now. Argentina.
oh, well, my research shows as before 2018, when Barbados did it, only
Mm.
three countries have shown on their records to have done it in terms of restructuring the treasury bill market. After restructuring the treasury bill market, Barbados then committed what we call an international debt default, where the foreign creditors were owed sums from the Barbadian government, and we had that team of foreign investors led by an expert negotiator in Dr. Dila Worrell. Um,
Now, there's a important nuance you're skipping in
yeah.
that summary. Very important. That especially last time, this is the most it is what you're talking about. The default that the Barbados government did was on the commercial credit of their borrowing portfolio, which is actually very strange because usually you don't just default on commercial credit, default on the entire credit portfolio, including bilateral credit, meaning like World Bank money and so on. What they did, they defaulted on the commercial credit, which is money they borrowed from, for example, like large hedge funds in the US. That part is actually quite strange. And there are a lot of weird things that happen in that negotiation that the Barbados government still has not actually presented to the public, which is very strange. And I think that if it's something I might even have to say it properly, but the mere fact that that happened in particular is quite shocking in some ways, in many ways actually. And that, by the way, the reason why right now Barbados has had a really difficult time accessing international finance is because they defaulted on commercial credit. So commercial creditors are very wary of even giving Barbados any money. That's why, for example, you see the Prime Minister Motley always trying to get the World Bank and the UN to give more grants to Barbados because it's very difficult for her to get money from creditors because of that weird choice they made to default on commercial credit. So it's a very important point.
Yes, well, thank you for that excellent perspective. Um, you added some information to my thoughts surrounding you said specifically the commercial credit.
That's
And
right.
obviously, Barbados having a change in our debt profile as of recent.
Mm-hmm.
We borrowed traditionally more money from also we printed quite a bit of money at the central bank during the 2013 to 18 period. We borrowed extensively from the national insurance, and we had some increases in terms of the treasury bill limit. Um,
I should say, Kimar, I know I'm kind of interrupting you, but I would say these things would not be possible if we were dollarized.
yeah, I'm
So
getting to that point.
right.
I'm getting there. Like, and we are going there. We're going to lead up to there. Yes. Um, we were borrowed from the national insurance. We had actual reviews. Some changes are being made. We borrowed from the central bank. Some laws were passed in the country to restrict the amount of finance we take from the central bank. And then there's the treasury bill limit as well. And we know that the government is trying to repair that relationship as it relates to treasury bills right now. And we are not borrowing really from local sources. We have now gone over to the multilateral banks as you suggested, with the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, the ADB, the European Development Bank, along with the other Dodd-Frank multilateral institutions. So my next question um, to you would be, how would dollarization change the dynamics of Barbados's debt portfolio? And you can give us a brief overview from, let's just say, our borrowing habits from 2008 to date.
So I'll start with this little tidbit. The reason why Barbados created a central bank is back in the 70s was not because of the basic idea of wanting your own currency. It was because, primarily speaking, at the time, Prime Minister Barrow wanted to borrow money, and the commercial bank said no. So, because of that, the commercial bank, primarily Canadian banks, so foreign banks, commercial banks said we don't want to lend you the money. This is very risky. We're not sure if it's going to work for you, and so on and so on. So he pushed to create the Central Bank of Barbados so he can essentially borrow from the central bank to do these kind of fiscal programs. So in some ways, the central bank was born in sin, in the sense that it was kind of let's say plundered from the very beginning to do all these kind of things. So the reality that in 2013 the government was doing a lot of financing, was borrowing money from the central bank. That's not a new thing. That was like almost the entire reason why the central bank existed, because the governments actually don't really um, create budgets in a way that are realistic, that are profitable, that are also forward looking. It's very kind of present centric. And if you look, for example, at the data for the um, um, essentially the deficit, so how much money the government owes itself, the kind of that data, the highest points are always in the election years. So they over borrow all the time in almost every election cycle. That's a big issue. Okay. So this ability for the central bank to finance, that means give money out of nowhere to the government in hopes that the government pays back the central bank, is the main problem of having your own currency. And if you do not have your own currency, and we could give some examples of countries that do not have their own currency that are very good, the government couldn't just call up the central bank governor and say, yo, I want to build this road down there, but give me some money. Impossible, because you can't create the money out of thin air. You can only use the money you have. So it's something in technical language it's called fiscal constraint. I mean, it puts a straight jacket that you look at in madhouse. It puts a jacket on the government and says, hey, you can't go about doing all the extra things if you don't earn the money. If you want to have more money, you have to earn more money. You can't just create it out of thin air and then increase taxes next year and say, okay, well, whoops, my bad. That's not possible. So that's the probably the most important benefit of dollarization, is that it takes away the power of the domestic government, to finance its own projects using essentially artificial money. Because as we can see in Barbados, when the government did that, and we're still paying for it now, really all the increased taxation, the bad credit rating, all of this is a consequence of these things. So dollarization takes away that temptation from the government and say, hey, you have to be fiscally responsible, right? It's like, if you're at home and you literally do not have any more salary and the bank say you can't borrow money, you have to actually do your budget better. It's not you will have the problem. Where in our case, in Barbados now, the salary to the government is very low, and the bank is saying, well, you know what? I'll just give you more and more money all the time. Come what may. We know what's gonna happen. We'll probably increase taxes. We'll probably get a bad credit rating. People probably gonna pay more for imported goods. But whatever. I'm gonna print the money and build, more stuff all the time. And that's a big problem in Barbados, in Trinidad, in Jamaica, but in Barbados in particular, because we have that peg rate that we try to keep. And if the government isn't careful, they're going to lose that peg.
But governments over time, especially the Barbadian government, has committed to that pay as being a very serious part of our development. So
No, to be clear, the peg is very good.
yes.
You don't want to become Trinidad, you don't want to become Jamaica. The reason why things have gotten so harsh the last few years in particular is because the velocity peg is the case. The problem is to maintain the peg and also increase the money printing requires very harsh fiscal austerity on the Barbados population. Hence why you're seeing everything is much more expensive, you're seeing high taxes and so on. That is the problem.
Well, some very interesting thoughts, Mr. Griffith. Uh, Alternate views, we're here. Again, we are up to 124 persons online. So welcome to you all this evening. Just to reintroduce our guests, we're having a chat with Mr. Rasheed Griffith. Uh, he's the executive director of the Caribbean Progress Studies Institute. So far, he's been giving us some very interesting discussions. Uh, Carsa Kadagan, I must issue my disclaimer. I'm not feeling 100% in terms of health, so that person you're hearing with the sniffles is me. But we're so committed to having this discussion and to having this show, introducing new ideas to the Caribbean, having thoughts that would help to drive the development of the Caribbean region going forward. So, we have to put in that time and to have persons like Mr. Griffith on the show. And so far, he's been offering an alternative view, which is quite different from the traditional economists that we have. So we should look into what can be done to rescue this country and to rescue the Caribbean. As he said, in Trinidad, which has a depressed or depreciated currency, in Jamaica, which has a depreciated currency, and in Guyana, who also has a depreciated. There were countries who enjoyed currency pegs at one point in time in their economic
Mm-hmm.
development,
Mm-hmm.
but they don't have that fixed peg like how Barbados has that fixed peg, and they continue to exist as societies under whatever circumstances you wish to describe them as. That is debatable. Uh,
Yeah, they exist, but in very harsh conditions.
yes,
As if you know anyone from those countries, yeah.
yes, harsh conditions, and it's very difficult for people at the bottom and the middle tiers to survive. There's abject poverty in those places. There's not much governmental support, if any, and the
Mm-hmm.
educational levels are very low. People live in almost abject poverty, and we want to avoid that type of thing happening in Barbados. And as Mr. Griffith said, we need some type of fiscal discipline to stop governments at large. I'm not speaking about a particular political party. I'm speaking about any governing administration which takes over the affairs of Barbados or a Caribbean country. We need restraints in place that would allow governments from printing excessive money, financing projects, to engage in corruption. We've seen recently in Barbados where we had monies being paid out to complete a housing project, and the monies have been paid out. However, the houses are not there, as was suggested if you look at the books. So we want to move past that type of, you said, those type of activities and economies, and to ensure that economies are free of corruption and mismanagement and misuse of public funds. And if we can have the requisite safeguards in place, again, to restrict any administration from abusing the political power gained, which essentially transcends the economic power, Barbados could do so much better. But we had a
Mm-hmm.
question here, Mr. Griffith, from someone on the live, and this
Mm-hmm.
person was asking, uh, with the push for digital currency, how many years of circulation does the US dollar have?
Excellent, excellent questions. It's Geraldine King. Good question. Now, this comes up a lot because people do something in particular, but they think something else. If I ask you, how do you usually use a debit card or credit card, or do you use physical cash for your, buying things? Not you particularly, Kimar, but it's the general you in this sense. Most people here will be saying I mostly use a credit card or debit card, for example. Now, what is that? That's digital cash, right? Almost everything you do is consumed using digital cash. When a wire transfer goes from one bank to next, it's digital cash. In reality, USD is only a name for something we call, we title this thing, the information we have in a bank account, numbers on a screen. We call it USD, we call it Barbados currency, we call it Trinidadian currency, and so on and so on. The physical cash that you have is a tiny, tiny, tiny proportion of the actual money that you use in the economy. So when you say digital currency, I figure it could mean for like cryptocurrencies and all these kind of fancy things. But in reality, primarily speaking, all money in the world has already been digital for 20 years. And we just don't update our kind of let's say mental model of what money is. So cash is irrelevant, actually, because people mostly use digital money. They mostly use a debit card, a credit card, a bank transfer, a wire transfer. That's how you use. That's how you live your life. So there's no problem if digital is cash and so on going away because it's already gone away in my perspective. I live in Europe, in Spain. I probably haven't actually touched a cash bill in probably half a year, perhaps. So the cash is not an important part. Most of our money is already digital, and it's gonna continue being that way until probably we see last days.
Yes. Well, I am hoping that you got an answer to your question, Geraldine. If yes, you can give us a thumbs up. And if no, I'm sure Mr. Griffith would clarify. But thank you for explaining to the audience. They love your engagement. So far, we're up to close to 150 persons, Rasheed. So
Mhm.
it's turning out to be a very interesting and packed evening. Good night to you, Clayton Vaughn, Sir Alfred Benjamin. Welcome to the show.
Good
Pedro
night.
Gemma, greetings to you, sir. Thank you for tuning in to Alternate Views. Fabian Lewis, greetings and welcome to this evening's show. We're here with Mr. Rasheed Griffith, who is the executive director of Caribbean Progress Studies Institute. So I want to take, she gave the thumbs up, Rasheed.
Good. Good.
Yes. We have a question from, we have some very robust discussion in the comments. Uh, we have a question from Square 4. Speaking about artificial money, it says here
Mm.
artificial money. I missed how artificial money is made and how does it become artificial?
Ah.
Good.
Okay. I mentioned that. I know what you're talking about, Square Four. I know what you mean. Right. Okay. So you have them. I will explain what I mean by that. Now, Kimar or anybody, but this is Kimar. Kimar, you work. Let's say you have a job. You go to office. You work. You work for the man and so on, and you get some salary. You put in labor, and as a compensation, you get a salary. And then you go use that salary. You go to Carlton. You pay for your food and so on. That is typically an actual exchange of resources, compensation properly done. Suppose, however, Kimar, you actually made no labor. You came nothing. You did no work. But for some reason, you just go into your computer and then you had the power to go to your bank account and say, add $2,000. Just all nothing, right? There's nothing traded for it. There's nothing done. You just say, yo, bank, you miss this account that says zero on the screen. Boom, now it says 2,000. Although nothing was really done to get that money. So that's why I call it artificial money, in the sense that there is nothing done, there's no work, there was no labor done, there was no goods being sold, no services being done, but the money just came out of this poof. You didn't know you had money. When the government goes to the central bank to just borrow money, they don't just get money from some there are some people that made some money that say, here, government, borrow this money, give it back. I earned this money elsewhere. No. What happens is the government goes into the central bank goes into a screen and says, hey, this account that says zero now says 2 million. That's all it is. That's what printing money means, really speaking, by the way. It means increasing the account of the bank, artificially speaking. Meaning the government did nothing, they give no services, they didn't do any extra goods, they didn't offer any more high quality things and so on and so on. All they did was ask for money, and the government created the money into thin air and gave it back to themselves. That's talking about artificial money, or what we normally say in Barbados, printing money. But no physical money is printed when the government prints money, to be clear.
Yes. But we have some more comments. They're coming in very ferocious now. We have a comment from a Mr. Carson Cadogan. Said, why does Mr. Rasheed feel the island should not be given reparations? Care to take that one, Rasheed?
So happy to do it, but that's a it's a long answer, and I know it's a very different topic.
Yes,
So
make it
up to
short.
you.
Make it short.
Um, Essentially, Carson, the arguments on which the pro reparations arguments are based on don't really hold up to good economic or historical or philosophical logic. It kind of sounds like it should be true in some ways. When you really pick apart the arguments, they don't really hold up. I have a long essay, like 8,000 words. It's super long on our blog of going through the arguments from Kerry Beckles, from the CARICOM committee, and so on. Because the problem is that the arguments they use to demand reparations by their own logic don't actually work out. And in my view, also, you don't need it. That's also a big part of the thing. I know that's a bit, in some ways, controversial to some people, but you don't need it. And the things that they should be doing to make yourself not need reparations, they don't do it. Instead, they ask for reparations. And to me, it's like if you actually want to be independent, be damn well independent and put in the work. But unfortunately, the work is not put in by the government in Barbados or Trinidad or Jamaica and so on. But
Hmm.
again, I have a long explanation on my blog where you can, if you want to, you can read it.
Yes.
But I do warn you, it's a bit long.
Well, Mr. Cadogan, log on to Caribbean Progress Studies Institute, CPSI
CPSI.media.
dot media, and you
Yeah.
can read Mr. Griffith's blogs. There's quite a bit of information on there, some new ideas, some new economic futuristic information, sorry, that you could reference. And you and Mr. Griffith could, knock it up about that. My short take on reparations, and I must say that I won't say that they should not get at all, but what I'm saying is if they do get, um, it should not be put in the hands of politicians. I think reparations should go to the development of the supposed to be benefactors, which are the descendants of slavery. I would support that money going to trust administered by members of the public. Could be professional bodies, and to allow persons to.
You see, the problem, Kimar, right, is that if you were to get reparations from the UK, you would need to tax UK citizens, which are, as you might know now, very often black, Indian, Pakistani, and so on, to give you reparations in Barbados. And oftentimes, we'll see, especially people that do well in the UK or from the Caribbean themselves, so they're taxing the Caribbean people to give back in the Caribbean. When you come down to the actual how would you do it, you really fall down the rabbit hole.
Interesting perspective. We're not going to spend much time on the reparations conversation because that is a whole show in itself. Um, but just to end off, Carson, I hope that the information Mr. Griffith gave to you was accurate. You could give us a thumbs up in the comments, let us know. But we have Adrian Hines here, one of our ardent supporters on Alternative Views and the Marcy Week Show. He said that I don't think they should receive a cent under the current dispensation. Trickle down economics benefit to the people. Don't I should see? I think that is don't benefit the people. Most of that money will be spent. We will be none wiser. We have
Actually, that's a very good point, Adrian. One of the biggest issues also is that because there's no way for the government to not get the money, and if they do get the money, it's impossible that it's going to be wisely spent. Like what basis do you have that logic on? So yeah, I think that's true.
yes, yes, and I agree. I honestly agree. Like I say, I'm not saying we shouldn't But based off the current setups that we have in this part of the world, I don't think the people would get the benefits of that money. So I think it should stay where it is, stay where it's at. Um, we have, because we want to move on to some more questions here. We have Tyrone Nurse asking if Barbados develop manufactured products. Um, at least, at least one at least would that make a difference in the strength of our
Dollar. Yeah.
dollar? Um,
Uh,
but you don't have to
okay.
answer immediately. Just let me get some more
Sure.
of the thing in, and
I'll
then
just
you could jump
remember
in.
what it is. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so that is Tyrone Nurse's question. As I said, Geraldine said you answered her question before quite well. She gave you the thumbs up. Galbiz is saying to Sean Cool that many persons are not aware that the US dollar life is coming to an end. We have Monica Ain't saying good night. Uh, Fabian Lewis giving another contribution. Galbiz is saying again, many people do not know the history of money. There's a difference between money and currency. Square 4 is saying that we couldn't postpone so important an interview such as this. We have to find out what's happening in the economy and hear how these young executives think. For these times, seeing BIM economy is in a very perilous state. And that's a very good point, Square 4. Traditionally, we relied on conventional economic thought. We had Professor Justin Robinson, who has been recently appointed principal at the Five Islands campus in Antigua. We had him on the show, and he gave not slightly a very quite different view as it relates to the management of the Barbadian economy and the future of it. He did not provide much scope for like how Mr. Griffith is doing for a possibility of dollarization of the Barbados economy and other Caribbean currencies. But as you said, these are different times, and we need to hear thoughts from our modern economists as to how the world is going, as to how the Caribbean is going, and to provide analysis as to where Barbados can go. Our historical relationships, being a colony of Britain, we are now a republic, which means that Barbados is open for business with the entire world. And that includes China, Chinese investment. That includes the Arabs, Arabian UAE investment, non-traditional investment partners because the world of finance is changing. Unfortunately, in Barbados, we don't have the size capacity. We do not produce at significant levels that we have surpluses on the books. So we have to develop strategic relationships with international financiers, and some may say fortunate, some may say unfortunate. China is one of the biggest world lenders as it relates to finances, and they do provide money and programs that many countries in the world don't do. Not even America does. So the as I say, the modern economic conversations need to come to the forefront as in a very unbiased way, a very non-political way as well. And persons like Mr. Griffith, that's what we have him on the show, is leading that revolutionary thought as it relates to new ideals and ideologies. So thank you guys for tuning in. We're at 164 persons and we're doing very well tonight. So don't forget to like and share the discussion. Um, we're having a very good show. We want to get some more persons on to take in your questions. Uh, so, just to read the final comments here before we hand back over to Mr. Griffith. He's saying, we have a strain, have we strained from the topic at the caption, or is it all being discussed relevant too? This is all relevant to the discussion. The cap, oh, sorry, not the caption, sorry, all of the discussion we're having so far is relevant to the initial idea of the conversation. Maybe the comment that you're seeing online, we've gone past that. So maybe I should change that. But this particular question by Tyrone Nurse was asked to Mr. Griffith, and I told him to pause, let me take some contributions from the audience, and that is why it's still there. We're going to revert back to that question. That is why we did not move it, If so, then we're going to segue back to this question, but I wanted to take on some of the views from our viewers in the comments. So, if that answers your question, please let me know. Square 4 is saying, thanks to you, Mr. Griffith. Good. Fabian Lewis is saying, all forms of money are social constructs, i.e., created by the systems among human beings. The present form for future is digital currencies. Martin Greenwich is saying, excellent info. Tyroner said, very good point. Kimar Tony Paris is saying, reparations should not be in cash. Annette Wood is saying good night. Tracy Barrow is saying good night, everyone. Emerson Bob
Good
is
night.
saying, I agree with you 100%, Kimar. The government should not get their hands on these funds if reparations are paid. Pauline Maynard is saying good night, Kimar and guests. Very interesting discussion. Thank you. And yes, but they're coming in too fast now, so I can't read all. So, Mr. Griffith, back over to you before we get carried away with the viewers. So, back over to you, sir.
So to respond to the question on the screen, is that what you're?
Yes.
Okay. So Tyrone, it's a good question. Let me ask. Let me kind of answer by ask a question. If you want to manufacture something in Barbados, let's say you want to, I don't know, I don't say. Let's say you want to, I don't know what, make microphones. You know, you want to make microphones in Barbados. Well, Barbados doesn't actually have natural steel resources, right? So you have to actually import all of that stuff. You gotta pay, you use USD to import all these things. Now, Barbados doesn't also really have the natural chemicals that all those things have to be done economically. They gotta import all those things too. The big machinery to speed up the supply chain and really have a good management line and have electronic systems are not made in Barbados. So you have to import those things too. Everything you need to use to manufacture in Barbados requires USD to import into Barbados. No, literally, agriculture, for example. Let's say you are going to, you want to make some, do some farming, right? Well, even the hoe you use to manufacture, the metal is not found in the ground in Barbados. It has to get imported somewhere else. So everything you manufacture in the country has to be imported still in some way. So even so when you come to say manufacturing could increase the dollar, no, not really. The Barbados currency, because you have to use USD to get the things in the country anyway, and then when you sell the things, you also sell it for USD. So when you export things from Barbados, the invoice is in US currency. So doing things in Barbados doesn't actually increase the value of Barbados currency. It just makes people's lives a lot more restricted and gives the government a lot more ability to ruin your lives by increasing taxes. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yes, well, like I always say, if that answers your question, give us a thumbs up in the comments. If not, Mr. Griffith would provide further clarification. But Mr. Griffith, we have a very interesting question here. And it's very interesting because Tony Paris is asking about the economic status in the diaspora. I would classify you to be a person in the diaspora, often
No,
not being,
definitely, yes.
you're not based in Barbados. Mr. Griffith is addressing us here tonight from Spain.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I know about Spain. I mean, I did geography in early school, but from a broader perspective, I know about Spain from watching football. Um,
Real Madrid, see,
Real
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Madrid and Barcelona,
Barcelona.
right? Um, so as
And
a
actually not
person,
very far from the main Real Madrid stadium. It's
yes,
quite close by.
he's here. Y'all guys remember I had on my Real Madrid shirt earlier last week on the Marcel show. So it's good to have persons like Rasheed, who's not based in Barbados but Barbadian, living in the diaspora, still seeking to contribute. So as a person living over and abroad in Europe, really, in a country like Spain, What, according to Tony Paris's question, what process does he think, which is you, Rasheed, we need to think about in improving the economic status of the diaspora? Um,
No, this it's a tricky question. 'Cause I don't. Do you mean people who are in the diaspora, or people in the diaspora increasing economic stuff in Barbados?
yes. Tony messages, let us clarify your question. But I will ask, well, I try to paraphrase it really and say, um, let's personalize it. Sorry, we ask you, the person who's experiencing it right now, from the diaspora watching on, um, what can we do? Because I will classify you to be a part of the brain drain, right?
Yeah, that's true. Yes.
What can we do to reverse brain
Hmm.
drain and to use some of Mr. Paris's words, increase the economic status of Barbados to slow down that brain drain? And what would encourage you to come back home?
So I say yes in the sense that people generally use the word brain drain. I actually don't believe in brain drain. See, brain drain is one of those kind of fake concepts, right? Now you say brain drain, but I'm literally talking to you in Barbados right now, increasing some of the econ knowledge and what I gained from being outside of Barbados and so on. And that happens quite often. And you can look at boring things like, for example, the amount of money that the retirees, so people who leave Barbados, go work in England, go work in Canada, or go work in Europe, they retire, go back to Barbados, and their pensions and what's not that they get remit to Barbados, all of that income coming into the country has almost been equivalent as the entire amount of money Barbados has earned from the offshore market. So when you think of brain drain, it's the people that quote unquote, took their brain and left, they came back and are actually bringing as much money to the offshore sector. And they do that because they left and they had increase in their earning capacity, increased their human capital, and actually went up the rungs a lot faster than to retire in Barbados. No, that's one aspect. So in some ways, it's not really a drain in some sense. In other ways, also, people that leave Barbados and go to other places, um, it is very difficult to calculate what brain drain could even mean, right? In the sense that, well, people go into Barbados and go to Canada and so on. They work these companies. Eventually, um, the things that they learn, their families heard about it, and Barbadians might leave and do more stuff and earn more money. Eventually, that's how things come back. It is very difficult to figure out what exactly constitutes brain drain. Now, in terms of what people in diaspora could do to influence, if that's the point of the question, kind of influence things in Barbados for the better, a lot of it really comes down to voting, unfortunately. And Barbados doesn't make it easy to vote if you're outside Barbados, unfortunately. And one of the main things that will help actually is that was much more easily done. Because one of the things that um, Barbadian politicians can get away with is that they can just know, slight, right? People who have only lived in Barbados necessarily has a particular view of the world. And one of the things that diaspora people have is generally a different view of, or at least more than one view of the world. And because of that, the way how they would vote for policies is dramatically different, in my view, than people who are just living and just growing up solely in Barbados. And if they were allowed to have a literal impact on the election cycle, much easier. It's very easy if you're American outside America to vote in America. It's very, very easy. It's not that easy from Barbados. If those things were allowed, I think necessarily speaking, the political conversation would have to be a lot different in Barbados. And I think that would be a dramatic change very quickly.
Very interesting question. Very interesting answer, Mr. Griffith.
Yeah. Because you think
Um,
about it, is like the politicians need to have the incentive to have good
Look,
policies. So that's a very important point.
Yes. Well, let me ask you something here. You said voting overseas, you
Mhm.
want to make it easier for Barbadians to vote from overseas. Um, I've heard the idea before, but given the propensity of Caribbean politicians, we have quite too many issues as it relates to voting at home. So I fear for the safety of such votes. I fear for the manipulation of a system. Um, and I say that
Many countries do this already. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. So, in some ways, to be honest, actually, because of so many standard practices about international voting, the international votes can actually be a lot more secure than the domestic votes because there's less manipulation power when you do international voting. Especially, for example, if you have particulars like do the hotspots, right? London, Toronto, New York, the hotspots. And in those, when you set up these things in those ways, you can actually really have very secure voting. And Estonia, for example, has very good voting systems. It's very cryptographic secured, and so on and so on. I will actually say once you do it properly, and it's not hard to do it properly, it's very do it transparently. The international votes will be a lot more transparent than the
are
domestic votes.
are these digital voting systems?
Digital is somewhat, yeah, the short answer is yes, but it's a very particular kind of so called cryptographic digital signature systems, which is used already in some countries. So it's not simply an online thing. It's a much more complex system, but it's been tried and true for a while now.
Mhm. Well, interesting. I want to say a good night to Mrs. Marcia Weeks. She's on the live, so good night to you, Marcia. I am very happy to have you on Alternate Views. We're looking forward to your questions. We have Mr. Rasheed Griffith, economist and executive director of the Caribbean Progress Studies Institute. He's based in Spain right now, Barbadian, but he's given us some very extensive analysis, even giving the recommendation of overseas voting and what it could do for Barbados, maybe the region. Um, you often speak about the diaspora, and you partner heavy with them. And he was giving some suggestions as a person in the diaspora as to what he thinks could be a better way forward. So we want some questions from you, Marcia. Thank you very much for tuning in this evening. We are on Alternate Views. We are at 178 persons so far. And I want to encourage you all to like the program and to share the program because so far we're having a very interesting discussion with Mr. Rasheed Griffith.
All right. Another thing with Adkimar, and that's what deviate, but another point to tag on to the whole diaspora thing. So one of the big topics I would like to see um, done properly is the opening up of the public sector to more international participation. It's a tricky one. So he thinks that if you have let's say a Barbadian person who's been working in Toronto for 20 years in a particular position, it should be very easy if they choose. And I actually think many people would choose this to come and work in the public sector in Barbados for a competitive salary for 3 years, 4 years if they want to, and actually use that skill that they've acquired in that time period to contribute back to the country. It's not easy to get that kind of job in the public sector in Barbados or most Caribbean countries. Now, this is a very big contrast to places like Bermuda for our BVI, for example. In Bermuda, they have if you have like conversations with people from public like the monetary commission in Bermuda, like you have like all kind of accents coming at you at the same time. And those kind of things, you will see these things are going a lot better than many other Caribbean countries. But because that flexibility of moving in, like essentially moving between the private sector job, that the kind of ease required to do that and should be the ease it is also in the public sector as well. And also, it shouldn't really be restricted completely to only Barbadian nationals in the public sector in the country. So if you are a good, let's say you're a very well established Canadian person or something, and you want to go work in the public sector in Barbados, you should be able to do it as well.
Well, very interesting. I mean, you segue into my next question.
Ah,
Um,
okay.
yes, because I often reference alternative views, the book here. Alternative views, many persons have a copy, and I wanted to turn to a section which spoke to specifically about the civil service and a 21st century civil service. And on chapter 11 in Alternative Views, Rasheed, I started the chapter by saying that the digitization process of government is an initiative in which the Barbadian community should embrace. It may provide savings from the duplication of processes within the civil service. However, this will increase retrenchments or job loss going forward as the paradigm shift of automation occurs. And with the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, the thrust of digital transformation became imminent in the delivery of services online. It was declared government policy that Barbados is intended to be a fully digital and cashless society under the Barbados Economic Recovery and Transformation Plan. So, given that the burden of taxation was increased in 2018, the focus in 2019 and 20 was on further expenditure reduction, mainly because of weak government institutions and deteriorating finances. And investor confidence may be revived when there is evidence of public sector reform, improved public services, and prudent government finances. A makeover of the public services to raise the delivery of services to standards comparable to those of Canada, the US, the UK, and further Europe is key to the achievement of both of these objectives. And I reference Dr. De La Worrell of 2019, where he said that the civil service needs to be reformed to internationally competitive uh, areas where government departments headed by highly educated and highly skilled workers, where they are equipped to engage in procurement and the ability to bid on international contracts, services, and to provide goods. It is frequently the case that the required permissions are so long in process by government agencies that investors lose interest and funding sources may be lost in the interim and market conditions may change, causing potential investors to move on. And that involves part of your question about opening up the civil service to internationally accredited persons. So, what are your thoughts?
Um, yeah, digitization is a necessity at this point in time. But just to be, let me just ask this question. So, Adrian, it's not, you have to still be a Barbadian citizen to vote. So I am a Barbadian citizen. I don't live in Barbados all year, or so I should still be able to vote with much ease, while not being in Barbados. And that's the example. Also, I would say residents of Barbados should also be very easier to be voting as well. Not only citizens of Barbados. So if I'm in England, if you're a Barbadian person or Indian person, really, you're property resident in England, you could vote in England, same in New Zealand and so on. So they're present for all these things. Now, in terms of digitization, yeah, it's a necessity, but the government has no interest in doing it. Right? They've literally done almost nothing to push it forward in a meaningful way. If you live in diaspora, I use that term, but it's tricky because countries are different. Like I when I pay taxes in Spain and so on, like everything is done online via very long codes and so on. Everything's done online, and it's these things are not difficult to do. The problem is that if the government does not have the will to do it, it's not going to be done. And unfortunately, our government currently does not have the will our ability to do it. So it's not done. But yeah, it would increase a lot of the uptake issues in the country. And you mentioned the retrenchment issue. Yeah, that will be a necessary component. There are ways to kind of cushion that problem, of course, but that's just all going to be part of the way forward, unfortunately. Or fortunately, depending on how you think about it.
Yes, so very interesting uh, that you would agree. As we said, alternative views is not about bourgeoisie political rhetoric, but more about economic truths as to what needs to happen to take Barbados forward. Part of it would involve, as Rasheed said, some type of liberal economic ideologies to help move us out of the
That's
rut
right.
that we're in. We go through this same cycle every couple of years, the same thing, high debt levels, overstaffed, still one of the prices. And because of the political fallout, the political will does not exist to make the required changes. One, in the public service, which could improve the country quite a bit if the government actually had some type of fiscal discipline. Uh,
Hmm.
if we had persons in government who had the skills, and we're not only speaking about persons with degrees, we're speaking about persons with skills. We education has now been liberalized. um, the traditional way education has changed, and persons are equipping themselves with skills to be able to tackle. I'm not going to say skills. I don't mean the traditional carpenter, mason, tiler, but skills in technical areas of economics, skills in technical areas of law, skills in technical areas of finance, banking, technology, and the world is there for us young people to take by storm. But Mr. Griffith, I we're going to change the conversation a bit because you sent me an article, a very interesting one, and it says, "Why does Barbados underperform?"
Mm.
And
Right.
I want to put that on the screen here that our audience can see, and I will ask you to comment on that article. But I just want to show the imagery first to the people, the viewers. As you can see here, we have three of our prime ministers. We have Barrow, we have Moin Arthur, and we have Mia Motley. And the article, or the headline of the article is "Why Does Barbados Underperform?" So before we scroll through the article, we're going to ask Mr. Griffith to make his comments, and then we're going to go through and jog his analysis and skills with some of our questions. So I hope that you're listening quite keenly because Mr. Griffith here is a breath of fresh air, really, in terms of offering his economic analysis and information to us, John public. So we're at 172 persons. Please remember to like, please remember to share. Marcia, we're still looking forward to that question from you. Adrian, you often ask some good questions. So I see you've been asking some in the comments. So maybe we will come back to those, but we really want Mr. Griffith to explain some of his thoughts on this and on this article. So over to you, sir. Why does Barbados underperform?
So I'm glad you like the image. Our designer will be quite pleased to, to hear that. So yeah, so this is actually written by the Halaro for our he's part of our organization as well. And the idea is this: you have a situation where Barbados in 1940s was a very poor country with very poor wages, with very little education. Literacy was high for a long time, from the 30s and 20s and so on, but like higher education was substantially lacking. And then between 1940s, early 40s, and coming to the early 60s, the majority of growth that happened in the Barbados economy occurred in that time period. So we've been actually living on the success of that time period for the last the last few decades. And a lot of people don't actually realize that. This is also a time where Barbados, as you might know, was not independent. Officially, it was independent politically in the sense that the choices made domestically were done domestically. And that was the case since 1950, early 50s. Sorry, early tens, essentially, like 1911 or so on. Um, so that's the crux of it. Now, a lot of the analysis in the article is about the fiscal problems that you can see exactly where debt really goes up. You can see, for example, how the currency really causes pressure on the population. You can see, for example, the really excessive taxes have not improved anyone's life in any real way recently. Or, for example, things like import taxes. Like people take import taxes as a given. Like, of course, you must have import taxes in your economy, of course, right? But what you can realize is that some countries don't have import taxes, and import taxes only contribute about 10% of total revenue to government. Yet they really disrupt our lives in many, many ways. Why, for example, Kimar, are you paying 44% import tax on jean pants? Right? There's no need for that. The things why clothes are so expensive because the import taxes are unnecessarily high. So they really cause big market distortions in the economy. So when you talk about liberalization of the economy, is these kind of topics. You don't need to have all these excessive things. The government has these very high taxes because the government tries to do too much. And there's no reason when the government actually has to do so many things at the same time. So I know a lot of Barbadians think, of course, the government should do all these things, and yes, and yes, and yes. But there's no reason why they should. And they're paying the price by the government trying to do so many things at the same time. There are over 60 state-owned enterprises in Barbados. That's a very high number. Um, and that is why the transfer of essentially when the government itself pays wages in the public sector or transfers like the Barbados Transport Board to just give them money to run the budget or transfer kind of things and so on. And all of that comes from your paycheck. And in reality, the quality, as you know, has only deteriorated because the management skills have not improved. They're not actually competitive. They're kind of falling behind everything else. So when you think about underperformance, you got to go back all the way to the 1960s and realize that a lot of things have changed since then. Were not for the better, they were for the worse. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't realize that. But if you need to liberalize the economy substantially speaking. I know people are going to find that controversial, but that's the only way you're going to have any kind of forward movement. No party in Barbados on either side has the guts to actually say this and actually do it explicitly.
Hmm. Well, that's very interesting. But you said one or two things that were very, very jogged my mind to answer this next
Mm.
question. All right, well, to give you an experience, I once heard a song by a singer
Mm.
called Chief Ding, and he asked a question on there: what is duty free, and why do tourists
Right.
come to my country and get things cheaper than me? Right,
Mm.
and then you spoke about why are jeans pants so expensive? Why do you order something from online for $1 and then when you get here, the price in the supermarket is 35 or even sometimes $50?
That's right.
Um,
Yeah.
right. So could you give us your thoughts on duty free and why tourists come to my country and get things cheaper than me? And then could you give us some more information on the import taxes that sends the prices in this country so high and send inflation skyrocketing?
So the inflation is a slightly different thing, but we could come back. I think someone also asked about Marla Dukaran, and that's the inflation also, but we can definitely come back to that topic. Now, duty free. So, it's not unique to Barbados per se. This thing, duty free thing, is just across the world. Like if you come to Spain and you buy stuff in Spain, you can get if you go to the airport, you can get back the money you spent as a refund on essentially the consumption tax. Because the idea is that you're not consuming the thing domestically, so you should have got to pay the consumption tax. That's the rough idea behind duty free. So tourists, because they don't live here, they don't really consume the things they buy domestically. That's the very basic idea of duty free. But it brings up the problem though, like why should there be duty free? Hello, because why shouldn't people who live there also get the benefit of paying less money? But the only reason you have the import taxes in Barbados is when the government needs extra taxes to fund all of the things that they do. That's the only thing. Because there are some like economic arguments like, well, you put import taxes onto goods, so the local version of the good will have an advantage in the marketplace. There are no local jeans pants, there are no local microphones, there are no local Apple laptops, there are no open local version of, there's no literal Kellogg's conference purpose. So that argument can't work. The only argument is, really speaking, the government needs to earn more and more money because they do so many things in the country. So import taxes is one way for them to essentially extort people more to get more funds. Import taxes, income taxes, corporate taxes, they're all revenue to government. And the government of Barbados is always in debt because even though they extort you so much, they still don't have enough money to fund what they're doing. So they go borrow, 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 print, print, print. So that's actually, there's no real good benefit of import taxes in Barbados. The country is too small. It only makes your life harder. And your food is more expensive, yes.
So to take a quote from Dr. Worrell's article, and which co-joins what you just said. He said, with growing tax income, the government was able to widen educational access, particularly at the secondary level, provide affordable public housing, and to establish a network of public health clinics. An effective non-governmental agency promoted family planning with official support, and this together with the growing middle class slowed population growth despite reduced infant mortality and longer life expectancy. And I bring that up to you because um, I went on a television, well, news, sorry, I witnessed news in the Bahamas, and I was interviewed by Shanique Miller, and her question, she played a video of our Prime Minister that we can see here, Mayor Motley, um, and she asked me to comment on what Miss Motley said in terms of life expectancy and that we need to have more children in the country. Unfortunately, my response to her was that things in Barbados are becoming so expensive to live. I hardly survive as an individual, and therefore, to ask me, like asking many other younger persons in Barbados to go and have children right now seems highly unrealistic given the economic challenges and the cost of living that we are facing. We have increased taxation on the people and increased tax income from the governmental level. And obviously, being in the IMF program, we cannot see or foresee income tax reductions in the near future. That would give me some incentive or encouragement to go there and have some children. So, what do you think about Barbados's declining birth rate, and what impact would it have on tax revenues, and further, what impact would it have on the country if not corrected sometime soon?
These are very, very big questions, Kimar. Now, the tax itself isn't a problem. I live in Spain. I pay very high taxes, a lot more than Barbados pay taxes. In Finland, they pay even higher tax. Actually, it's what is same, very, very high taxes. But they still have children, for a fair amount of children. Not high, but many families do, right? Because the reality is that if the quality of public services that help you with the child care is affordable, regardless of the actual tax situation, it's not actually that big a burden. That's the part. It's not a tax per se. You can have high For example, in Finland, you have very high taxes, but you have free childcare. The government actually, when you have a baby in Finland, for example, the government sends you a massive box filled of products for the baby that last like months and months and months and months. Most people in Finland also use the big box as like a cradle for the baby as well. So it's called a baby box for that reason. And, so they get, and you have free health care, free eye care, free education. So, but they have still very high taxes. So the tax rate itself isn't a problem. Um, Now, the population thing, see, Barbados also has a problem of not only people not having children per se, but also very highly educated women leaving the country and have better lives in Canada or England, right? So if your population is also having an outward migration, particularly women who are generally very well educated and much more so than men these days, that is going to have a depression on the birth rate, of course, right? Obviously speaking. So the migration factor is also a big issue in Barbados. So the birth rate, again, itself, to me, is a big problem. The big problem is how do you convince people to stay in Barbados and live their lives? The problem is if you are very well educated, you're going to want to get more opportunities. And unfortunately, the government or the economy doesn't create more high-end, high-paying jobs. So it's not competitive with the world. And now migration is generally very, very easy, especially if you're highly educated, to Europe, to Canada. The US is a bit tricky now these days and so on. But because of that particular pressure, you're also going to have a depressed birth rate. So Barbados population hasn't actually changed to like 1960s or so, 1980s or what's not, whatever. So that's just two primary problems. And you mentioned like pensions and so on. Barbados, you said Barbados is becoming expensive. Barbados has been expensive. It has been expensive. And the pensions and so on, that's only going to get worse and worse and worse, Kimar, because the kind of jobs that Barbadians have access to in Barbados aren't high enough earning to actually produce more income, earn more foreign exchange, actually gives you a more, how do you say, upper middle class lifestyle. So those are the kind of really fundamental problems. So unfortunately, the Prime Minister talks about increased birth rate, but she needs to talk about how do you increase high capacity earning jobs. And unfortunately, I think she has no answer to that question.
Whoa. I really didn't look at it that way in terms of leave the tax levels as they are and focus more on high income earning jobs. Uh, that is a very interesting perspective. Unfortunately, we have our dog back with us again, so he's being a little loud.
I think it's okay. Not too
Hoping to
bad.
get in our conversation. But no, I think our attempts were made in terms of trying to create jobs. I don't know if they're high income earning jobs per se.
No,
When
they're,
the
they're not. They're not.
yeah,
Yeah.
when the COVID hit, we had what we call a Jobs and Investment Committee that was created by the Ministry of Finance to create 20,000 jobs, and
Mhm.
they coined it as an industrial revolution in Barbados. And part of that committee was the former Minister of Finance, Chris Sinclair. We had the former Prime Minister, Warren Arthur. We had Professor the Honorable Eugene Bartow, and we had about in total about 8 persons on this Jobs and Investment Committee. And as I said, they were intended to create 20,000 jobs to help drive economic activity in Barbados. Now, I must say that as a person trained in finance, banking, economics, I was like, this is totally unrealistic and will never, ever, ever happen. Um,
Correct.
Simply because the public service is already overstaffed and needs to, if you read the IMF documentation, there's already arrangements in place to reduce that headcount. So they
Mhm.
can be absorbed through the public sector because we simply don't have the finances to sustain an additional 20,000 jobs on the public purse.
Well, nor do you want them in the public sector. That's the important point as well. It's too
Yes.
big.
Okay. On the private sector side, There is no incentive for the private sector to, because realistically, if you're looking at private sector is in the business of profit making and not charity. Let's say that. And if it is not feasible or financially sustainable, there's no way that the private sector will take on that level of human resources. Even if it was subsidized by government, which government can't subsidize that level of employment, they still will not take the risk of doing it because it is not feasible anyhow.
Well, it's a slightly deeper point, Kimar, in the sense that the private sector is a concept, right? But what you're really trying to say, should say explicitly, is if there are no more new companies that get create and start that are well funded, there are no more jobs, right? The current company that exists with the job content they already need. They don't need if they need workers, they'll hire them. You don't
Yes.
need any extra people. So if you're not actually making it more conducive and more attractive for companies to enter the Barbados market that provide higher paying jobs, the committee is useless. And it was useless and it will always be useless, unfortunately speaking. Government does not create jobs. At best, good jobs. At best, they make the conditions to enable job creation, which they have not been doing.
Yes. Well, very interesting. Viewers, we're up at 204 persons tonight. We're really, really doing the numbers. So I want to thank you all for tuning in. I'm having a very good discussion with Mr. Rasheed Griffith, the Executive Director of the Caribbean Progress Studies Institute. And you don't have to hear it from me. You can hear it for yourself. And you can say it yourselves as well in the comments if Mr. Griffith has brought a very interesting and deep discussion that is making us think about the economic future of Barbados and the wider Caribbean. We are coming up anytime. So what I will do at a later date, well not a later date, at a later time, is that I will invite persons after the discussion with Mr. Griffith to call in. Just reach out to me, you know the usual. Um, and I will send you a link and you may be able to come on and let's have some verbose discussion after uh, the thoughts of Mr. Griffith. So if you're interested in coming on to the show, you can reach out to me at 846-9912 on WhatsApp, and I would provide you the link that you may come on to the show and ask whatever question you wish to ask, and let's have some discussion on it. If Mr. Griffith chooses to stay for that segment, he may do so. However, we arranged from last week that we were going to do almost a 2 hour conversation. You know, we had a tad bit late start, so we can give him some extra time to reclaim his time to contribute anything that he wishes to go. But for this last segment, we're going to give him the floor to not necessarily ask a question, but to give his perspective on anything whatsoever that he wants to give a perspective on, and let us have some discussion around some of his original thoughts. So, Mr. Griffith, could you give us any burning issue, any concept, theory, ideology that you want to share with us, and let us have some discussion for the remainder of time on your thoughts.
I'm not sure if I have any particular to say. I've said so much so far. If you have any questions you want to ask me, I'll be happy to answer questions. If I were to say something, I would say one of the most important things that is necessary in Barbados now is just a lot more liberalization of the economy, which will involve things that are usually boogeymen for a lot of Barbadian people. But I think that these are things that are actually beneficial more so to the working class person than anyone else.
We have someone here, Pete Ray, is asking who determines the pay rates for jobs in Barbados. I don't know if you want to take that one.
No, companies do. There's only a minimum rate as the basic thing for some jobs, but companies decide when they want to pay, and you decide you want to take the pay.
Yeah. But from a governmental perspective, the government has legislation on the books which determines wages in some areas of the economy. So there's a minimum wage act, a shop stewards act, which determines how what rate you could pay. There's no
That's the floor. That's a
yeah,
floor, though. That's not
yes, not a
a rate
ceiling,
per
but
se.
minimum,
Correct. I
basically.
actually, by the way, think you should not have any minimum wage laws in Barbados. That actually causes more harm than good.
Well, that's a very interesting, liberal, and radical opinion. So you definitely have to say what you would make of such a claim.
It's radical in Barbados, but I mean, if you have worked at a minimum wage job, you know this point. If the employer has to pay a higher wage by necessity, they will just cut your time that you work. So you eventually either make the same amount of wages, or you actually earn less and not more. And that's just anyone that works those kind of jobs knows that. So the government actually distorting people's income, not helping them.
Well, that's great.
People in Barbados always talk about, Singapore is a good model. You know what's the minimum wage in Singapore? Zero. There's none.
Hmm. Well, that's interesting because we actually don't have laws. As you correctly said, we do not have any laws that protects minimum hours.
Correct.
We
And you
focus,
can't have that. That's a complete decision of the corporation. What you do is that you distort the market by fixing the pay at a floor level.
yes.
So you allow the employer therefore cut the hours to maintain his own floor budget. So people who are at the minimum wage get often essentially frigged up because they actually earn less money. And that's not unique to Barbados. That's a thing that happens across the world in every country when they have increasing in wages and so on. So eventually, again, for the working person, because the person that's owning the company, they're earning the same amount of money. They're not damaged, right? The working person is who's actually taking damage.
Hmm. Well, that's very interesting. We've not had much of that. I actually heard some of that conversation from one political commentator, um,
Mm.
seasoned businessman, vice president of what you call Restaurants Limited or Burger King, which is a
Mm-hmm.
franchise in the country. This is Mr. Ryan Walters. He made some extensive comments publicly about minimum wage and minimum hours and how he would tackle that issue. So maybe we should have him on the show at some point in time to discuss wages in Barbados and what constitutes a livable wage given our economic circumstance right now. Uh,
Well, I would say also the idea of a livable wage. Sorry, I have a lisp. Livable wage is that it is not determined by public policy, and oftentimes, as I think people might understand this viscerally speaking, oftentimes many jobs should not be paid a high wage, right? If your job is essentially very basic, you should be getting a rate that is commensurate with that job. However, if you put in the effort to get more education, to get more skills, to get more techniques, you, of your own fruition, should be able to go to a higher level paying job. If there are so few high level paying jobs, what are you going to do? And that's the core issue in Barbados. You can't really go up much further, right? And that's the issue. Barbados has been successful as a country. No, don't let me mix words. Barbados is a success story that has failed. It's not a failure of a story. It's actually worse than that. Because we think we were going in a very, very good direction for a very long time, but the hard work became harder, and unfortunately, our governments did not step up to the plate to compensate the extra hard work needed. So right now we're in a situation where you can work in a hotel, but that's okay, but you got to go up further, further, and further. So those are the harder conversations that you do not hear, especially our current government willing to engage in.
Very interesting. You will say that, Mr. Griffith. That is why alternate views is here to introduce the hard conversations, the factual conversations, and we greatly appreciate your presence this evening to start the ball rolling. We have some further comments here for you. We have a Nigel
Hmm.
Newton asking,
Okay.
what do you think Barbados' economic performance, or do you think, sorry, Barbados' economic performance could improve if we decolonize the economic system? He would have to say what he means by decolonize to get a more accurate answer. Um, we had some earlier contributions about the overseas voting because we do have a very large base on the show that lives in the diaspora. So they were rather intrigued by that conversation. Judith Ann Clark is asking, when the government defaulted in 2008, which is saying when the government defaulted, it took a lot of us took significant losses. That is true. Mr. Griffith touched on that earlier on the show. Um, Somebody is saying here as well, why are there no maximum wage? uh, we have somebody's agreeing with you and saying that yes, that pushes you in a higher tax bracket. Um, Again, more voting conversation from Adrian. Adrian X is saying a livable wage in Barbados at minimum should be $2,000 a month. Uh, Mr. Shirlene, Miss Shirlene Clark, sorry, is saying, yes, Mr. Stewart, Mr. Walters' views would be welcome. Your guests are very professional. Clayton Vaughan is saying a good presentation by Mr. Griffith. Judith Ann is saying, yes, my previous comment, I missed some of what he said. Uh, Calvin McKenzie is saying, Mr. Griffith, economics is tied at the hip to politics, brackets political economy. Why is the current economy only benefiting the top 1%? I agree, Mr. Griffith. Our politicians have not stepped up to the plate in recent times to compete with the global village. And to
You know,
define,
people often say the economy is benefiting the top 1%, but oftentimes because the top 1% doesn't really have any money Barbados, right? They don't depend on Barbados to make their life and have their wealth and so on and so on. So the problem is that the things that the government needs to do to actually increase the people's wages and incomes and healthcare and so on is all the actual work that has to get put in. The 1% is completely fine. So that's the thing that the policies aren't actually designed to help them. They're set. They're done in many ways. You can't really do much to change how they are. But the things that people in Barbados that kind of shun it. Okay, so it sounds like it would benefit the top 1%, but in reality, that it actually mostly benefits them. And unfortunately, we have to somehow kind of push this idea a lot further, I think, because if it naturally sounds that way, trust me, I understand what I am saying sounds like. But the reality is that if you don't try to do these kind of more liberalization policies or people kind of capitalistic policies in the Caribbean, you're not going to get anywhere for the working class. What will happen, however, is the 1% will remain the 1%. And I don't think that's a good outcome.
yes. Well, Judith is asking you, would you recommend reinvesting at this time
We're investing what?
in terms of government's um, maybe treasury bills?
No,
Uh,
I would, and I don't, I'm not sure how it will sound, but I would say if as much as you can, keep your money outside of Barbados until the government actually increases its credibility.
Well, Judafan, you heard it from Mr. Griffith. He says she's asked government instruments, and as he said, his answer would be no, not to reinvest into the market at this time. He would recommend you keep your money outside of Barbados. And as we said on the show previously, and he explained it quite well. She's saying debentures and treasury notes. Right. Well, the government is really pressed for cash at this time. So they are trying to ignite interest in the
The
local.
government is pressed for, again, you have to be careful when you say things like this. The government is pressed for cash because they chose to increase the expenditure extremely fast in an unjustified way, and at the same time not trying to increase the input, the income itself. There are things that they can do to fix the problem immediately of increasing the input of money from outside of Barbados, right? And those are things that you're not really hearing about. I know that the um, Auditor General, every year gives a report. It could be more substantial, but it's already very substantial. And the things he's been saying, or they've been saying, they need to be done. They're not being done, right? If you can't even have a precise 100% certainty of the money in the treasury, what are we even talking about as a country, right? You want to tell people to put your money in treasury and you can't even count how much money in treasury? So those are the kind of problems that come up. And you have to get to a point where you actually can attract more foreign investment. Actually, if you're a Barbadian and you earn Barbados dollars and you reinvest that Barbados dollars, you don't actually increase the economic pie. Actually, only foreign exchange does that, and the government is hell bent on not trying to actually put in the hard work in increasing foreign exchange potential in Barbados.
Yes, so very, very. Hope that answers your question. It actually added a different perspective to my mind because we're soon winding down in terms of this segment with Mr. Griffith. Because we don't want to keep him, it's late in terms of the difference
Oh,
in
it's very
hours.
late, like 2
Yes,
a.m.
yeah. And it is 2 a.m. in Spain where he's based. So Alternative Views had to bring this one to you. I heard Mr. Griffith. It sounds like he has a bit of a sniffle as well. I have a sniffle as well, but it shows our commitment to developing the region. But I just want to ask him in winding down, and I want to
Mhm.
take one more quote from the book Alternate Views, and it says here, page 23, Barbados as an island developing state has benefited significantly in terms of foreign direct investment post independence in 1966 up until the global financial crisis in 2008, where the world experienced significant drawbacks in private capital. In more recent years, Barbados has been struggling to attract foreign direct investment as emerging economies across the globe with higher potential for economic growth and return on investment have been giving Barbados some challenges. The preferential exempt surplus agreement with, that Barbados enjoyed with Canada, which allowed Barbados to repatriate dividends into Canada, was taxed locally at our international business tax rate, which eventually will be changed. It has been extended to other countries like St. Lucia who had zero tax rates. And that particular action caused at least $250 million a year to disappear from the shores of Barbados. And foreign direct investment levels into Barbados since 2017, this is before the change of administration, has been significantly low. The attraction of record levels of foreign direct investment is pivotal in agreeing with what Mr. Griffith was saying in order to achieve a sustainable growth trajectory in the country's economic sectors which have potential for growth of new business. So, what are your thoughts on that quote from Alternate Views?
So you got to be a bit more careful, Kimar, because when it comes to the numbers like this, you can have a lot of money that flows into Barbados for various round tripping tax optimization policy, but it's not actually deployed in the economy. So a lot of time when you have, for example, preferential tax rate, to Europe, Canada, so on, because like captive insurance and those kind of things, that is not necessarily productive foreign investment. And when it comes also to a country of Barbados' size, this is a very important point, everyone. Barbados is a tiny, tiny country. Yes, that part is obvious. But what that means is the capital requirements to actually improve things in Barbados is a trickle in the bucket when it comes to international financial markets. So things, for example, like really massive financial crises in the world, played right, don't really have big impact on small economies. So, for example, in the height of COVID, Barbados was, desperately struggling to raise money and have to go to IMF and so on and so on. Same time, again, at the height of COVID, Bermuda was able to increase a bond by $1 billion in like a couple of weeks. There is no shortage of money in the world for small economies. As fallacy, right? So what the problem is that the attractiveness of Barbados is not taxing and so on. It is the deployment of domestic capital for actual projects, well managed and well maintained and so on. That has been lacking in Barbados. The project problem is lacking because it makes it so bureaucratic. There's not good management. It's not good policy stuff. The actual taxing is not a big issue. It's the project potential and the bureaucracy. So we don't need $300 billion in a bond offering. We need maybe less than one, probably $300 million. I actually wrong the actual SIM number we actually try to get. So there is no lack of money at all. And I think that unless we can have a more serious, well, I say we, but I really mean the administration and the public sector. If there is a more serious conversation, until we have a more serious conversation on the world as it is, and not any pretend world of political rhetoric, then we're not really going to get much further. But these things, luckily, are well documented, and you have to be careful and look at numbers. Even when you look at foreign exchange, like our foreign exchange looks high, but it's not actually proper foreign exchange. A lot of borrowed money you get inject in there. So it's a false sense of security that the prime minister always say, "Oh, we have very high foreign exchange." Okay, but how much money? How much of that is borrowed? The central bank doesn't even disaggregate the actual components of the so-called foreign reserves. The prime minister just says, "Oh, we have a lot of money," but in reality, it's like if you borrow a lot of money from the bank, you can't say you're rich. That's not how it works.
Thank you, Mr. Griffith. We've come to the end of our segment. So let me thank you for coming on to the show. I had a very, very good discussion. We spoke from wine to iodine, from lamb to jam. And I really enjoyed this discussion. And I know that the viewers enjoyed the discussion based off the interaction. We had some people asking questions. You were able to advise Judith Ann Clark as to where to put her investments. Um, on in another area, that advice could have cost 30 or 40, 50, even $50,000 a month. Um, if he was one of the Barbadian consultants. But it shows the care that Mr. Griffith has for Barbados, as he is a Barbadian, but he's living in Spain and taking in that international experience. So we want to express a good thank you. Um, Mr. Alfred Benjamin, Sir Alfred, he said, so Mr. Griffith is saying the PM is just talking. I think that is what he said. And we started the show by saying that the pronouncements from politicians, um, we would like to see some change as it relates to taking the affairs of the people very seriously as it relates to our economics and the practice of economics, and having persons in the space who can correctly guide the conversation and not provide populist partisan rhetoric, which could actually chase investors away from the region. And it has that effect already. So, what
Correct.
Mr. Griffith was trying to do here, if I understand him to be doing that, is to set some tracks on the road as it relates to how we can move forward. Borrowing political rhetoric or dangerous conversations from our leadership. And this has nothing to do with a political party. This has to do with all political parties. This has to do with all persons interested in managing um, politics and, by extension, economic power of any country in the world. So this conversation could go for any country in the Caribbean. So I don't want persons leaving here thinking that Mr. Griffith attacked the Barbados Prime Minister and he no, I didn't get that. I got a very candid conversation about how the persons who make pronouncements right now, which are our political figures, need to basically revert and allow, even if it's themselves, allow persons who have the foresight, the knowledge, the education, and the skill to take on such leading roles in developing our economies for the future. And I enjoyed it. And I think that most of the viewers enjoyed it. I think Mr. Griffith enjoyed it based off how calm and expressive he looked at interacting with you. So I will let him have his final word and then he'll introduce our guests or who will be our guest next week. And then I'm going to do a short segment where you can call on the program and I would have you right up here where Mr. Griffith is sitting. I will have you up here that you yourself, the viewers, can contribute. So if you want to do that, call me quickly at, no, not call, sorry, message me on WhatsApp 846-9912. You can get the link and I'll have you in the show. So Mr. Griffith, have your final word, please.
Oh, I want to say thank you, Kimar, and thank you for all the listeners and the amazing questions that people ask. People, all gonna have very good, thoughtful questions. I know that sometimes you like to talk about China a bit. We didn't talk about that this time. Maybe a follow up conversation or so. I been to China maybe like 20 something times or so. I used to live in Asia for work previously. And I used to have a lot of, I spent a lot of time thinking about China, especially China, the Caribbean, and Latin America as well. So lots of potential more conversation about that in the future, I believe. But yeah, as anyone, I would recommend to follow the cpsi.media blog. You can subscribe and you can see what we put on some newsletters, some content. Yes, I will admit some is very, very long. We do have some shorter pieces also if you are interested. That's cpsi.media.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Griffith. Someone is asking what time is it in Spain. He said it was 2 a.m. about 16
It's
minutes
now
ago.
2:15 a.m.
Yes, it's 2:15 a.m. So we have to go and let him
Yes.
get some sleep right now. But we just want to thank him so much for coming on the show. As was announced earlier, Alternate Views, the program, will be having a very deep working relationship with Mr. Griffith and the Caribbean Progress Studies Institute, something that will be announced in the future. We put a precursor on my LinkedIn. Um, However, um, we would announce our respective we announce our respective relationships in the future after we solidify, and we'll move from there. So thank you, Mr. Griffith. Pleasure working with you. We have some other persons from the institute on the program very soon to come and express some additional alternate views. And as I said, and as Martin Greenwich is saying here, this was your most enlightening program to date for him.
Okay. It's good. Good to hear. Good to
So,
hear.
so
Okay.
it gets
Have
better.
a have a good night and have a good, in my case, morning. So bye.
Yes,
Thank
so
you.
thank you very much, sir. Have a good morning. Yes. So there you have it, viewers. Mr. Rasheed Griffith. I had a really good conversation with Mr. Griffith. Given the fact that I received no requests to have or any calls, we're going to take an early evening. But before we go, I want to introduce who will be our next speaker next Thursday. We'll be having a discussion on cricket. Oh, lovely cricket. We'll be discussing the state of Barbados cricket. We'll be discussing the state of West Indies cricket. We'll be discussing the state of the Herman Griffith primary school cricket with a Barbados cricketer. We'll be discussing alternate views next week with Chad Williams, who's a Barbados cricketer. And Mr. Chad Williams will come on the show and he will give his perspective as to how he feels about cricket in the region. And I encourage you to tune in next week. Remember, we're discussing all of this in the context of the economy. What does cricket do for the Barbados economy? We're having Cricket World Cup coming up. This is the second time that Barbados has hosted a Cricket World Cup. We've had the one in Kensington at Kensington 2007, and now we're having another one in 2024. So Mr. Chad Williams will be on next week, Thursday, 50, that's the 15th of February, to give us his alternate view on what needs to happen with cricket in the region and how can we use cricket to develop our nation. So, as I said, that's to read some of your final comments here. Galbiz is saying, thank you, everyone. Another great show. Tyrone Nurse is saying, Kimar. Many of us said on the show that the BLP governor cannot manage our economy and cannot manage our economy and they need to be fired. Lang is not managing the people's business. If Mia was in a civil job, she would be fired. Um, so as was said, we're going to wrap up tonight and call it an early night. So I hope that you all have a very good rest of your night, and I will see you next week. Tune in to the Marcy Week Show tomorrow at 7, and then we look forward to the march, the protest march on Saturday. But thank you very much, Kimar Stewart, host of Alternate Views. Thank you for tuning in, viewers, and have a good night, everyone.